I love the answer that came back on one of the study forms. They said it was simple. When a woman, unlike a man, was asked to operate a new piece of machinery, she would ask directions. I'm sure that any of us who've driven endlessly with our men in the days before GPS understand what that meant. Well, sadly, as the war drew to a close, attitudes toward women workers shifted. Though surveys showed that 7 out of 10 women still wanted to continue working, saying they had enjoyed the sociability of the workplace, the financial independence, the mastery of new skills, the pleasure of a job well done, the pressures mounted on them to stop working. The national network of daycare centers set up during the war was shut down unceremoniously, not to reopen for a generation. Still, despite everything, female employment, though it fell for a while, something had been set in motion. And by the late 40s, it began rising again, soon surpassing the wartime peak, and it has continued to rise ever since, to the point where women today make up nearly half of the workforce. And not surprisingly, the daughters of these World War II women forged the women's liberation movement in the 60s and the 70s, the movement that not only solidified legal and political rights for women, but fundamentally changed the relationships between men and women, between women and their children, by making it possible for women to exercise their talents to the fullest, develop lasting careers, and figure out ways to combine the love of work with the love of family. Well, that each generation faces its own chapter in that struggle for man's unending search for freedom was dramatically illustrated this past week with several stunning decisions from the Supreme Court. On the one hand, a critical section of that same 1965 Voting Rights Act, which had stood for 50 years, was struck down. On the other hand, the struggle to end discrimination against gay and lesbian Americans took a giant step forward when the Supreme Court declared unconstitutional the Defense of Marriage Act that denied federal benefits to same-sex married couples and also nullified California's ban on same-sex marriages. As was true in the struggle for women's rights and civil rights, gay activists had to fight long and hard to reach that moment. Homosexuals were banned from working for the federal government by an executive order in 1953. Applicants for military service were banned on the basis of their sexuality. And then in 1969, when police raided a popular gay bar in Greenwich Village, a series of protests began that eventually ignited the gay rights movement, placing Stonewall alongside Selma as an iconic moment in the struggle for human rights. Each time a man stands up for an ideal, Robert Kennedy once said, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope. And crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which could sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. As we gather together to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, we can look upon these graves, knowing that each of these soldiers who rest here tonight sent forth their own ripples of hope, and that those ripples built a mighty current that swept the scourge of slavery from our land, giving our beloved country, as Abraham Lincoln so magnificently promised, a new birth of freedom. I believe with all my heart that history is about telling stories, stories about people who lived before, about events in the past that create the contours of the present. By studying the lives of others, we hope that we, the living, can learn from their struggles and their triumphs, which is why I shall always be grateful for this curious love of history, allowing me to spend a lifetime looking back into the past, allowing me to believe that the private people we have loved and lost in our families and the public figures we have respected in history really can live on, so long as we pledge to tell and to retell the stories of their lives. I am so honored to be with you tonight as this great celebration begins. And so now, ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy the Voices program. Thank you very much.